DSOs pay a lot for your practice. Is that true?
It depends on if your practice is how worth buying is your office.
So do they pay enough?
I had a team of 52 people. My corporate team was like, I had an assistant and I had my mom who was like a accountant. That was it. That was the corporate team. My mom, my dad are a big influence in my life. Money and these things come, but you have to be able to serve your patients or your customers.
What was your role?
I was head of dentistry for Walmart US. I had a doctor. She was like, I want to sell my office, but I'm only going to sell to a doctor. I'm not going to sell to a DSO. And so I said, a DSO for this office would probably pay you $3.5 million. If you sell to a doctor, so the maximum they can pay you is $1.75 million. And then she's like, there's some good DSOs, right? And I'm like, yeah, there are.
DSO is great for two reasons. One, people are very visionary clinicians teaching you implant, teaching you ortho. You're really learning from the best. So how do you sell your practice? Where do you start? What are the questions they got to be asking?
Yeah.
What was the revenue when you picked it up? DSOs pay a lot for your practice. Is that true?
It depends on if your practice is how worth buying is your office. Like in the housing market, how turnkey is your house.
Right.
If your house has a newer kitchen, remodeled bathrooms, or it's a newer construction, it's probably worth more than the 1958 ranch with 7-foot ceilings and a kitchen with white appliances or something like that.
So do they pay enough?
I think sometimes they pay too much. But yeah, I think a lot of times they pay enough. They pay more than a doctor to doctor transaction would be.
How many practices have you built and sold?
Wow. I've probably built and sold 75 over the years, like with private equity helping as like a advisor or confidant or something. And sometimes I'm for friends or friends of friends or dental school classmates, I'm like free advice. I can't bill somebody that I've known for 20 years. I want to.
So maybe before we open that topic, why don't you share some of your background with us, where you started, the Walmart story, and then we go into do DSOs pay enough or not?
Roshan Parikh, dentist by profession, born and raised in Chicago, went to business school, dental school, all in Chicago, graduated in 2008. I didn't know that was a recessionary time in our country's history. I just knew I had $233,000 of school debt. And so I really wanted to buy a practice.
Right.
I think I had done 4 root canals at that time, 3, 4. And so I was looking for a practice to buy and bought a practice. I think I got denied for loans from 6 banks. The 7th one said yes because I wrote a business plan and convinced the selling doctor to take 50% of the debt and back me. And so that was 2008, October. We closed on it.
So the seller financed it for you?
Yeah, 50% of it. And he wanted like,
so you didn't put
at
cash.
that time, I had no cash.
Yeah.
I literally, that's why I got denied. That's why I got denied from so many. I mean, I remember sitting in a Panera Bank in Chicago, a Panera Bread in Chicago, and just getting denied. And the guy just looks at me, and I'm like, I was 28. I grew a beard, and I tried to look older. And he's like, I had a business plan. I had a hardcover book of cases I did in school, and I'm telling this guy that look, this practice can grow from 400,000 to $1 million and do this. And he's like, it's a really good idea. And he's like, let me know when you do it.
Right.
It's not, I could imagine when you guys started SprintRay and told people what you wanted to do, they're like, yeah, let me know when you do it. Not now.
Exactly. And then what was the revenue when you picked it up?
360,000.
Got it.
Yeah.
So you got in, and you were
Yeah.
you were the owner.
I was
Everyone
the
thought you
owner.
were the associate.
I was. If you see a 28-year-old Indian kid and a 65-year-old Italian guy, no matter what the economics are, the Italian guy owns the office, and
Right.
I would be in there, and I'm like, we expanded the office to 5 operatories. One of them was his office, which I turned into an operatory too. And Dr. Camino, who I still know, and he was seeing patients, doing hygiene checks, and he was doing his job. He'd bring me in, and he's like, hey, this is Dr. Rowe. I want to introduce you, and, you guys should see him for this crown or this. And you're talking paper records, film x-ray, and I'm like, eager, put me in, coach. And I also own the office, and the patients are like, no, I just rather see you. They're like, I'm glad you hired somebody. And then I go back in my office, and I'm like thinking about the debt service, my student loans kick in 6 months, and I'm like thinking about all these things. I'm like, okay. So then the practice started to grow. We had new patients and some patients that needed like I remember the first procedure I did was like a root canal number 30. And I'm like so excited because it was a new patient in pain. I knew that I could help them. And I knew that I was going to be able to produce something. And then I'm like thinking, okay, I'm thinking as the business owner, but then I'm also like, wait, this is my 4th root canal ever.
Scary.
Right. So you're kind of like trial by fire. I mean, you're just like learning.
Got to go through it.
Yeah. You got to go through the reps, and you get more and more reps, and all of a sudden you have more confidence. But I mean, every day in the office, like for, probably first 6 months. So October 2008 to, I don't know, sometime summer or something the following year, I was the associate. And I mean, I started to grow a book of business, but I was just seeing Dr. Camino saw his first patient at 4:30 a.m.
4:30 in the morning.
4:30, because he was seeing like third shift Ford workers. There were a lot of, on the south side of Chicago, there were a lot of Ford plants and things like that, factories. So he captured an audience, but he had a 2:30 tea time. So he was doing that so that he could leave. And then if you needed to be seen on weekends or Wednesday or, Friday, he's like, no.
Next week.
Yeah. So, and patients would wait because
Right.
his dad was a dentist before him.
A lot of goodwill.
A lot of goodwill. And so I learned from him how much goodwill matters.
Exactly.
And I mean, even though this is the same guy that would give a inferior alveolar nerve block without any topical gel, and then the patient would be like, oh my God. And he's like, I'm sorry, it didn't hurt me a bit, and just walk out of the room. Even though he said that, he still had this much goodwill.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So you grew it in 6 months to 1 year.
Yeah.
What was the revenue?
It went from 360. It did a little over $1 million the first
Wow.
year. And we added kind of the modern day DSO model. We added more hygienists. We added evening hours. We were open every other Saturday, and just added convenience. And I think convenience at that time, especially for that patient population in that area, it wasn't there. Because I learned in school that if you're good at your job and you have a loyal patient pool, over the course of your career, you can drop insurances, work less hours, take more time off, and make more money. And that sounds great to me, the provider, but my question was always to my professors, I'm like, well, for the time-sensitive, time-starved, busy mom that's dragging their kids from here to here, or for themselves that doesn't have time, what does that mean for the patient?
Right.
And they didn't really have an answer, nor maybe did they care. They were just more like, well, I mean, that's how you could make more money. And I'm like, what if you can add convenience and add specialty and grow practices and incorporate more families and more specialty care in four walls? And what if you could, make money that way by actually taking the value proposition, and which seems to face the doctors a lot, and kind of flip it to facing the patient.
Right. And where did you learn these? Like, these are not natural, intuitive to a lot of dentists that I've encountered.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of it comes from like just that, like my mom, my dad are, big influences in my life. It's like just doing good, like money and these things come, but you have to be able to serve your patients or your customers. And it was like something simple, but it was, I guess now what I know about dentistry back then, and how litigious it can be back then, like if a patient, we did a post and core and a crown on 29, I still remember this case, and the next week the tooth was broken to the gum line.
Wow.
I told the patient, I'm like, you know what? I'm like, that was my fault. And I think that, maybe there was feral, but I should have told you that, you need an implant. I'm going to refund your money and we'll call the insurance and do this. And I think you should look at getting an implant. If you think about that idea today and refunding money, if you're a bigger DSO or something, and whose production does it go off of, and did we have some liability, and did they sign the consent form, and did they do this? I didn't have a consent form. I was like, I think this was the right thing to do. But I'm sure today, if that happened, people would be so nervous that they were going to get sued or have the, Chicago Dental Society, Illinois State Dental Society, somebody call them or this. But I just, in my heart of hearts, I knew it was the right thing to do. And that probably has guided me a whole bit. I think I've gotten smarter and more sophisticated on the, consent form side. But it's like that, those principles back then, if there was an area that didn't have convenience and didn't have a lot of availability and a lot of multi-site kind of specialty care or multimodality care, it really boomed.
Right.
So, yeah.
When did you get your MBA? After dental school?
I actually got it before dental school.
Before dental school?
Yeah. So it was, 2000.
So you did MBA, then you decided to go to dentistry. That's pretty opposite of everyone I've seen.
Yeah. Everybody today is obviously like now MD, MBA, like, DDS MBA, DMD MBA is very common. And there's programs in school that are doing it simultaneously. Back then, because I'm old, there was like more of like a pharmaceutical consulting track. And so Loyola had a 5-year MBA bachelor degree program. And so I got my MBA in a year in finance and marketing. But when I got to dental school was always the goal.
So you knew you were going to go to dental school?
Yeah, the MBA was the detour. And I remember telling my parents, and they're just like, my mom's like, okay, I'm like, I think it'll come in handy, and you could own a business and you could do this. And then she's like, your uncle is a physician over here and he owns his business and he doesn't have a business degree and he came from India. And you're like, yeah, I know. But I mean, at one point, some people like my aunts and uncles would ask my mom, they're like, what's Ro doing? And she's like, I think he's a professional student. Like he doesn't even want to play in the game. He just wants to continue to get
learning.
degrees. Yeah. So you don't have to like play, but I got an MBA and I went to dental school. And when I got to dental school, there was somebody else that had like a master's in engineering, but I was the only person with an MBA. So I had a lot of street cred. But I had no experience. So the MBA was a neat piece of paper, but I got my real MBA probably when I started growing my practices from 1 to 2 to 4, then had like private equity funding and then grew bigger. That's like real MBA stuff. And I think about it now for some of my friends or family that go to like bigger, Ivy League schools or something. They don't even look at you unless you have previous real world experience.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Theory is theory when you have a payroll on your shoulder, when you got to pay your bills, when you're not collecting fast enough, when the bank account goes down, you got to balance. That's a different level of humility.
That's right.
that
That's
everyone
right.
goes through.
You learn real quick. I mean, you're like trying to think about, you're looking at payroll next week and the schedule, and you're like, how am I going to make this?
I have a gap.
You've been there.
I mean, see, payroll makes you humble. Doesn't matter, 2 people or 200 people.
Yeah.
How many employees did you have at the peak not with Walmart in the?
Yeah. We had 450 employees.
It's pretty humbling.
Yeah.
And it's a responsibility every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
No, totally. Yeah. So how fast you grew it to 35? I want to hear, you're kind of going through it fast, but man, it's a lot of work to go from 1 to 35.
Yeah. So 2015 had a private equity sponsor come in and grew from 2015 to 2019 from 4 to 35. And so
2015 you had 4.
Yeah.
This opened it up. I think the whole topic of bringing in a sponsor is foreign to a lot of friends and dentists. So how was the process? How did you convince them to invest in you?
It was, so they approached me. I didn't even know what private equity meant at that time.
I see.
So back then, it wasn't like I had a team of, I think, 52 people. My corporate team was like, I had an assistant and I had my mom, who was like a accountant. That was it. That was the corporate team. And me with like, I was clinically practicing, and then that was my second job at night, was running the business. And so we started to grow, and the private equity sponsor was interested in dental. And so I thought that I'm like as a clinician, or even like in my own ethos, like I'm a lifelong learner. So I wanted to learn more and grow bigger, but I didn't know how to grow on my own, because even in the 4 offices, I would go to each of the offices to work, except for one, but still I'd go to all the offices and work at least 1 day a week, if not 2 days a week at some. And so I knew how to lead and manage by line of sight management. I didn't know how to manage by metrics.
Right.
And so that I learned in the private equity world, of how to manage by metrics and how to build dashboards and, kind of hold clinicians accountable or get their buy-in to like how productivity and patient care are related. And me as a clinician, I think that's a language that I speak well now. But when you talk to clinicians nowadays, even if it's like, it doesn't have to be in just dentistry. You talk about clinicians in medicine, specialty care. Everybody is managed by metrics, but a lot of clinicians are disenfranchised by this. Like you think about like an internist or somebody or family care doctor and 15-minute appointments, and they don't love that. But I think that I learned a lot of how to manage by metrics and why, but also in my private equity story, you kind of learn what's good and what's bad. And so when I reflect back on that journey, the learning, like that was my real world MBA. But I also know the difference between like what like money and smart money and kind of low touch and high touch sponsors and this, like I could build a whole chart based on who somebody is and a practice owner is, or a group owner, or a DSO owner. And if they're taking in capital and taking on a sponsor, it matters who you work with. But the valuation, I think a lot of times people are most concerned about, and that matters. But you're also getting married to these folks. And nowadays, taking that analogy ahead, it's like you see more and more divorces and you see more and more bad stories. And so then now people are like, they understand more now than ever through hardship that like
other factors matter too. Yeah.
It's not just dollars.
How much did you raise from them?
The valuation was like sub 10 million. It wasn't
When
like,
they
because it
joined.
was
Yeah,
small,
yeah,
you know, it was. And
then
so
from 2015 to 19.
we were,
So you exited that completely after 35?
I'm actually still a
Still a
equity holder
part
and a
owner.
fan. Yeah.
So you're waiting for a transaction?
You know,
Technically.
yeah.
Yeah.
But you see nowadays, like there are, I don't know how many there are this year in the last 12 months. There's probably 12, 15 abandoned or failed processes. And there's so many folks that go to market that don't get a transaction. And I think that when you do a post-mortem on those, what matters is not necessarily like how many offices you've acquired, the integration of the offices, the tech stack, like those things matter so much.
How did Walmart happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. That was 2019. I left my DSO and I started a consulting business for like private equity funds and banks and had a couple of clients, and then a headhunter and now a good friend of mine, John Fiddler, approached me and said, I know what your next role is going to be. And I'm like, okay. And I was, interviewing here, there, and thinking a lot of it was private equity funds that wanted to bankroll me to build my own
Network,
DSO from scratch. Mm-hmm. Starting from zero is unbelievably hard. You know this. I mean, starting from zero is
0 to 1 is a different energy.
Yeah. So I was saying no to those, and John was like, I know what you're gonna do, and I'm like, okay, tell me what I'm gonna do, and he's like, well, I can't tell you yet, and I'll tell you in a little bit, and blah blah blah, and so he's like, it's a retailer that wants to go into healthcare, and so I said, okay. So in my mind,
did you guess?
Yeah, I guessed Amazon.
Amazon. Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to work for Amazon. That'll be cool. They're going to do healthcare. I've read about this. And so when he was like, Walmart is building healthcare centers starting in Georgia, and I think you'd be a perfect candidate to be head of dentistry for Walmart. I'm like, but I shop at Amazon. I don't know. I don't want to like.
I don't shop at Walmart.
Yeah, I don't shop at. We used to shop at Walmart, and I've been to Walmarts, but I'm like, I don't know. So I went to Arkansas and I met some of the team, and they're all brilliantly smart people. And the story of like how they came up with Walmart Health was they had surveyed 25,000 of their own customers' households and asked them the three things that, like keep them up at night. And everything was around healthcare. And it was like, like doctor's visits, cost of prescriptions, cost of copays. And so if they want to serve their customer better, they're like, healthcare is where we need to go. And Walmart had $4 generics for many years at that point. And so they started the concept of Walmart Health. And the other, I think thought was they were really behind in understanding that internet was going to be where people shop. And so the question is like, how do you bring people back to the box? Right. How do you bring people back to the store? And it's going, one way is healthcare services, retail healthcare, taking your dog to the vet. It's like those things can't happen via tele, and it can't, the procedures can't happen via tele. So Walmart Health was born. The first site opened Friday, September 13th in 2019 in Dallas, Georgia. Dallas Dr. Oz was there, who's actually from Georgia. I didn't know.
What was your role?
I was head of dentistry for Walmart US.
From the get-go. So you started to essentially build it from scratch.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. And
wow.
I mean, the first site was 10,000 square feet. They, from concept to opening was less than a year. The build was 6 months. So like we were paying tuition to learn. So it was like money is no object. That first site cost $14 million plus. Like it was
no one cared.
Expensive. Nobody cared.
Wow.
Which is the opposite of Walmart's ethos.
Right.
That it's like everyday low price mentality. But at that time it was just like, doesn't matter. So we had, CAD CAM, we had CBCT, everything ADEC. It was one of the most beautiful dental offices you'd see. But we iterated, and so the first one didn't look like the second one. The first one was 4 operatories. 3 of the operatories were open bay, and 1 was a treatment room. And then it evolved to closed door operatories because nobody wants to get a tooth pulled in an open operatory that echoes everywhere. So it evolved to 4 closed door, 3 closed door, and then 4 closed door operatories. It went to 6 operatories, which it was, but it was such a neat journey. And you're talking about like working with a team of brilliant minds and just nice people. But at the same time, Walmart Health was like a Fortune 1 size startup in a company like Health and Wellness, which is 75,000 employees. So like Walmart Health's P&L is like, it's not even my fingernail. So it's like a rounding error.
Exactly.
And so, but they were, as we built them, they saw that like more people were going to it was working, meaning like more people were going to the store to buy things. More people were getting their prescriptions filled there. They would redo the inside of the box so that when you got out through optical, over there was like the healthcare items, the dental items, the vitamins, like those things. So they would redo the inside of the box. It was, super neat. And very quickly we were building them modularly, pre-assembled, kind of essentially coming pre-assembled from Bessemer, Alabama, with a company called Blocks, and were just brilliant. And we would, our ADEC chairs from Shine were getting shipped to Alabama, and they're getting installed there, and they're getting put on these trucks and getting assembled like these like Lego blocks. So we could put up a site in 90 days from a concrete slab. To go.
How did your family feel about it? Were they happy?
Yeah, I think the best. My parents immigrated from India in the late 70s, early 80s, and so I told my mom that I'm gonna take this job as head of dentistry at Walmart, and she's like, "Finally, you have a real job," and I'm like, "Well, you were a CPA and or an accountant, and you worked for my old company and retired with them. You have that plaque like that sits on your mantle," and she's like, "But I know, but this is Walmart. This is like a real job." And I'm like, okay. So they were all happy, and I was happy. My office was in Arkansas, and so they wanted me to move there. And I said, I can't move from Chicago to Arkansas.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Did
they try to move you?
I went down there, and they were like, you can, there's a lot of good places to live. There's good food. There's this. And I was like, I got to know the HRVP pretty well, where I'm like kind of unapologetically myself. So I was like, there aren't a lot of there aren't a lot of Indian people here. I'm like, and she's like, there are like 3 intramural cricket leagues. And I'm like, I don't play cricket. I'm like, I know that's what you would think. I'm like, I play basketball and tennis. And so they're like, well, I guess so. So the kind of compromise was I relocated to Atlanta.
Atlanta. That's why you're based out.
That's why I'm based in Atlanta.
How many practices did you guys build?
Walmart Health had 50 locations.
50 locations. What was the vision? What was the upper limit?
So one cell, besides like being able to kind of offer convenience, we were open 7 days a week. One cell was there's 3,000 Walmart supercenters, and 1 out of every 3 of them were going to get a Walmart Health, and so that was going to be 1,000. So
could be the biggest DSO going after.
That's right.
Aspen and PDS.
Yeah, it was going to be at that time.
That's why you took the job.
And I was like, wait, I'm like, me? Okay. It was a pretty noble cause. And you just work with such smart people and such good people. I'm like, this is such a neat role. But the vision was 1,000, like 1 out of every 3.
And how did you pick locations?
Just
follow Aspen.
So many. Yeah.
Was it real?
Well, like the Florida sites, I think a lot of them there were Aspens that were in the parking lot, and Aspen has, the Walmart customer is similar in some ways to the Aspen customer. And so we did, have some Walmart Healths that were in the same parking lot as the Aspen. I don't know how Bob and Dr. Judge felt about that. I had dinner with them. They called me. I had dinner with them sometime in 2020 in Chicago. And Aspen is, like we were talking about, like super sophisticated and just a bunch of smart people. And there's really nothing that can scare or startle a group of that size unless you're a $500 million retailer.
Exactly.
$500 billion retailer. And so
they felt the competition.
Yeah. And they just, they're not shy. So they wanted to know, how many sites are we going to build? What's it going to be like? And so I gave them some numbers, and then as the night progressed and there's more alcohol involved, I'm sure I gave them the spiel of like, I can't tell you, obviously. But I think they were,
wow,
they were a little, it makes you pause, but I think that they're such a good company, and they're so strong at so many things that I don't know if they really cared. But at that time, there's probably nothing, you're kind of like invincible until you're not. At some point, they were probably
felt like there's a worthy competition is coming. Yeah, there's a great organization. The way it's managed, run, very sophisticated.
Oh, it's unbelievable. Yeah. And now they have aesthetics, vet,
everything,
derm,
diversified.
Everything. Right, urgent care.
Yeah, we talked about it last night at dinner that if you want to bet which one is going to be a public DSO, what was your answer?
I put my chips in Aspen. If I had 100 marbles and I had to guess which DSO could go public and have the best result in the kind of, now you're taking public debt and you're in the public market, the answer is probably Aspen.
Which is why?
They have a single brand. They have diversification outside of just dental. They're Aspen. They have Clear Choice also, or they're now the Aspen Group tag, but they have urgent care, vet. So it's like, even if one vertical maybe is down, the other verticals and the diversification probably helps a lot, which other DSOs don't have.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So how do you feel when smaller ones tell you they want to go IPO?
Yeah. It's hard. It's like, now the story sometimes is like, if they're out of silver bullets to try and get sellers to sell to them, this seems to be like there's probably 7 or 8 that are in the mix of being able to tell that story. I don't know much, I'm not a full-fledged finance guy or a finance bro. It's like I'm like, the public market and being tested there. There have been dental companies that have gone, DSOs that have gone public.
They
and then
have
taken back private.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, long time ago, and they've always been bought back private, but it hasn't been successful. You know, like you look at healthcare companies and healthcare organizations, like One Medical being public and then getting acquired by Amazon. I think that's a great comp, but medicine is different than dentistry, and so I think that One Medical is probably a good comp.
That was like a hospital.
One Medical Group is tele, and they had in person.
Is there any hospital that is public?
Yeah, I'm sure. Like
so that model those guys are public.
Yeah, and then maybe there's
so it's not far fetched.
No, and I think maybe there's like I've talked to some colleagues about hospital systems buying DSOs, and maybe like that. Like when you think about dentistry and you think about the rest of medicine and how dentistry is just like a carpentry business compared to the rest of medicine. There's a guy I like a lot, Norton Travis, who's the CEO of ProHealth based in Long Island, and he talks about, I think he's like coined the phrase of like put the mouth back into the rest of the body, and I think that concept maybe makes a lot of sense for hospital systems to look at acquiring DSOs.
Dental.
Yeah.
I grew up in Iran. Big department of hospitals is dentistry. It's like for me, when I came to America, I was like, what? Dentistry is not part of a hospital? It was interesting to me to kind of wrap my head around it. It makes sense. We also had dental hospitals.
Oh.
It's like a 4-story, hundreds of chairs.
So it was like
massive clinics.
Urgent care? Or it was did specialty?
It was everything. It was like a 4-story, 200 chairs. And it's like a dental super clinic.
Yeah.
This is also a model in China. They have huge dental hospitals. That is really not in the U.S.
Yeah.
It's just not. I think the structure is not like that.
No. There's some like in Wisconsin, I know a group that has like some 50, 60, 70 chair locations, but they were really early on, they were supporting union workers. And so the chairs were so close together, but maybe union workers didn't care that somebody's getting a root canal 6 feet from them.
Yeah.
They knew that they weren't paying for it.
Exactly.
Like the benefits were great. But outside of that, I don't think there's a lot of those big offices. I think in North Carolina, they had a Philip Morris, the tobacco company, had a dental office for their employees, and it was something like
massive.
100 locations,
Makes
like
sense.
something
Makes
crazy.
Sense. I want to close the Walmart story.
Yeah.
How did you get out, and what happened to that great project?
I left in 2019. I mean, I left in 2021. Sorry, I left because they weren't. Like 2021, they didn't open any centers, and so
post-COVID, was it a COVID thing?
It was still like during COVID. It was more they focused on pharmacy. Amazon had rolled out like they acquired a company called PillPack, and they were rolling out mail order pharmacy. And pharmacy is 90% of Walmart's P&L for health and wellness.
For health.
And
what was
so
your P&L?
Whatever 1% of pharmacy is.
I see. So it was not even in the.
It was there.
Tiny line.
It was there. But you're talking about if health and wellness is Walmart's revenue last year was something like $550 billion. Health and wellness is is 10%. Let's say
like
$55 billion. Something.
And then dental.
So it's like if you don't even if you're a
sure. That's
if you're not if you're an M and you're not a B, you don't even make the you're the rounding error.
But it was so profitable, as you shared.
I think it was so
successful DSO.
It was successful. The dental part I think was successful. But then primary medicine maybe is like a loss leader. It wasn't. Medicine is hard and medicine's expensive. But primary medicine has been so commoditized that like urgent care, tele, like if you wake up on Sunday morning and you have a earache, or your kid has an earache, you could figure out whether it's tele, urgent care, without going to the ER, where to get some sort of care. And it's pretty widely established across 50 states. If you wake up on Sunday morning with a cracked tooth, God help you, you can go to the ER, you can get some, like IRM, like some zinc oxide eugenol, and put it in your tooth and wait till Monday.
Right,
and then call around to see who can get you in. And so dentistry had never been commoditized the way medicine has. And so primary medicine, I don't think, was making money. And I think that when you look at the P&L in silos, dentistry was okay. But you can't look at a P&L in silos, especially for a publicly traded company. So the blended P&L wasn't making money. And I think that's what Walmart cited as like kind of why they ended up closing it.
All locations
closed at once a few months ago. I was talking to some of the folks.
Were you sad?
Yeah. I mean, and I felt for the patients, and there's probably 50, probably 1,000 plus employees that were affected at the corporate level, at the local level. And I still keep in touch with some of them. So I was talking to them, and my biggest concern was like kind of, what do you want to do and how can I help you? So I was like connecting them with some recruiters and this, and kind of doing my part to help, because some of these folks are just brilliant people working on a brilliant project that's really like moral compass facing north in the right direction. And they were, from the conversations I had, they were getting a hang of it. And so they were getting the hang of it, and they're like, they're like, bro, we were just like performing at such a level, and we were optimizing, and we were right there. And so I think when you look at all these like retailers that have tried primary care, it's a grind. Like everyday retail healthcare, whether it's like, urgent care, derm, dentistry, oral surgery, endo, like whatever it is, it's such a grind, like to just win the patient, to then win the next patient, and then to kind of win the day, to then win the next day, to win the week, like, and it just doesn't stop. And so you can't, when you're talking about patient care, different from what retailers sell otherwise, when you're talking about healthcare services, you can't commoditize it. You can't, all these like Harvard MBAs that are in PE funds that are looking at sophisticated models of predicting disease and doing that, that's theory of medicine. But when you put it into practice, I can't tell you with confidence as a clinician, the next 10 patients are going to walk in the office and 4 of them need a crown. Like, I can't do that. But when you try and make that model make sense in real life, and you don't understand that human beings aren't all made the same, it becomes tough. That's like the business side of medicine and the clinical side of medicine and diagnosing and clinical autonomy, and the things that people really rubs them the wrong way in today's world. Like, I couldn't tell you I want to do 4 crowns a day. I can't promise you I want to do 4 crowns a day, but I don't know if I'm going to get them.
Yeah. So capitalism part of the dentistry versus the purpose, or what is it, clinic mission? I think it's tough to balance.
Right. Yeah,
it's really hard.
Tough to balance. And that's why there are, there's like 150 different DSOs that have some private equity capital or institutional capital. There's different flavors of all of them, and they kind of run the gamut from being completely almost hands off to being, kind of like a little bit more like a management company, to being very, very hands on. And so for graduates, my little cousin just graduated from UConn's dental school a few months ago, and they have their choice of where they want to go if they don't specialize. But it's like when you're looking to even transact to a DSO, it kind of reads like a Chinese takeout menu. I mean, you want vegetarian spring rolls, you want brown rice, kung pao chicken. You could order number 86. There's a DSO, and so I think there are a lot of options for selling doctors and for associates, but it depends on where you are in your career and how much touch you want. You want high touch and you want more guardrails. There's an associateship DSO for you. You want people to leave you alone and let you pick your bonding agent and your composite. There's probably a DSO for you too.
I share my site and things I see, and maybe we open it one by one. There's a little bit of, I don't want to call it a stigma. I have a lot of DSO customers. I love them all. But out of dental school, when you tell people go join a DSO, they take it like, no, I want to own my own business.
Yeah.
I think there is that part. What's your thought on that?
So, I mean,
is it real?
I think less and less. Like, I think it's still there. Your professors, when you're that impressionable, are going to dictate. And nowadays, I mean, different from when I was in school. When I was in school, if you said that you were going to be like work at a DSO, people didn't even use the DSO. Like you worked at a corporate office, like you were like a sellout.
Yeah.
Like you were just like, why would you do that? But my professors were telling me that like, well, when I got out of school, I just hung up a shingle and I grew my practice. I owned it for 35 years and then I sold it to another dentist and now I teach. That path doesn't exist anymore. You know, it's much different. And I think that sharing somebody's experience as like a elder statesman or elder stateswoman is great, but making that what should happen for impressionable dental students, I think is unfair.
Right.
And so I think that like when you look at dental students today, DSOs lecture at schools, they do lunch and learns. There's social media and the internet, and there's a plethora of information about all DSOs. And so I think that they know more. So I think there's probably less stigma now than more so than ever. But it's always gonna be there. But there are a lot of benefits to a DSO, especially for a newly minted dental student that's been kind of running through school and through education up until their mid to late 20s. They have freedom. Like they could go to work from 8 to 6, 9 to 5, whatever, and then go do something.
Exactly. There is one part of it, I don't want to, it's a little hypocritical too, because all of the people who bash DSOs, they want to grow and build a DSO. There's a little bit of that going on.
Yeah.
But let's not get into that.
Yeah. They want to put their own, they have the secret sauce that's going to make
but then they
DSO
become a DSO.
better. Right.
This is, again, right, at least this climate. The other part of it that I think it's great for newly grads to join a DSO for a couple of reasons. Unless you're extremely entrepreneurial, which is a smaller percentage of a batch,
right,
that you want to go through learning the business, learning the operations, learning numbers, learning technology, integrating technology, essentially learning 50 different things and having a student it and making ends meet. That's a path of owning your own or going, again, that path of entrepreneurship. DSO is great for two reasons. One, everything is figured out.
Yeah.
You show up, they train you with the best and the best doctors as their clinical directors.
Yep.
The clinical directors at Aspen, at Fordable, at North American Dental Group, these people are very visionary clinicians teaching you implant, teaching you ortho. You're really learning from the best.
That's right.
Then you have a salary, and as you said, it could be a 9 to 6, and after 6, do your own thing.
Yeah.
On top of that, they get to train you on everything. You get the best technology, best prices, and after 3 or 4 years, if you didn't want to continue that path of being in DSO, then you can go pursue something else.
That's right.
You got trained minimum. At the minimum, you got trained essentially for free.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point. And I think you see more and more clinicians, like younger clinicians, taking that arc of like they're learning, they're learning on somebody else's dime, and they're taking all the continuing education they can. They're, going to Pankey or Spear or something on the weekends, or taking an online course, and they're getting really, really good at their craft, leveraging somebody else's name and patient base.
Exactly.
And then they feel confident enough, some of them, that are like, okay, I'm going to buy an office, or I'm going to build an office, and I have this great name and this great idea, and I'm going to do it my own way, and I'm going to be the king or queen of my fiefdom. And you see that like 3 to 6 years, 7 years out of school, where they feel comfortable and they have a good skill set. And then they take the next leap and the debt of buying an office.
And then the people who decide to stay in the DSO environment, I see happy people.
Yeah.
It's like a
Yeah.
it's like a cult.
Yeah.
They love it, the
Yeah.
culture, they're successful, they're
Yeah.
making money. There's also that path that I think is very appealing.
Yeah.
And it's much easier than building your own.
Right.
It's much more convenient than going through the payroll burden that we were talking about. This is the thing that I think in today's climate, young grads gotta give it a good thinking.
Yeah. And I think more and more of them do. I mean, I even see like M&A transactions where the dentist worked for a DSO, that same kind of arc I was talking about, 5 years, 6 years out, they build an office or buy an office. They do it for a few years. They get tired, and something in their life changes, and they're like, you know what? I don't want to do this. I want to go back to being an associate. And so they sell their office
And become an associate.
I've
seen that too.
And so that's the beauty. Like, one of the beauties of dentistry is like you can take so many different paths, and it doesn't matter. And your path can be, it's never a straight line. I think people want it to be, but it could be convoluted. It could go 2 steps forward, 3 steps backward, and this, but you're still moving. And like when you look at, you talk about like AI today and what jobs it might take, or this, it's not going to take ours.
That's right. So true. Some automations.
Yeah, some automations,
happen,
yes. And that'll make we were talking about that yesterday too. Like, it's like,
you work less.
Yeah, you work
it.
less, and you can use technology more. I mean,
Right.
the fact that you can use your printer and take files and use your phone to be able to activate printing. I learned that yesterday, and I was like, holy cow, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's happening.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to the question that I started at the beginning. Do DSOs pay the most if someone want to exit and sell his practice or her practice?
Yes.
So that's a true statement.
Yeah. I had a doctor in California that reached out to me this year sometime, Q1, and she was like, somebody told me, you can help me sell my office or do something. And I'm like, yeah. She's like, I want to sell my office, but I'm only going to sell to a doctor. I'm not going to sell to a DSO. I'm not going to do anything. And I'm like, okay. It was like, in my head, I was like, you probably don't drink Starbucks. You're like, okay. But so I asked her some little questions about her office and dollar numbers and EBITDA and this, and so she gave me the numbers, and it was like 500,000-600,000 of EBITDA. It was a good office, and so I'm like, okay, and there was the top line revenue was like $1.5 million, maybe 1.75, and so I said, a DSO for this office, like back of the napkin math, could probably pay you $3.5 million. If you sell to a doctor, like you want, your maximum that a doctor can take out as a loan is 1 times revenue of the practice. So the maximum they could pay you is 1.75 million. And then she's like, there was like a long pause on the phone, and she's like, I mean, there's some good DSOs, right? And I'm like, yeah, there are. But that's the numbers. When I talk to my friends that are like investment bankers or more like practice brokers, the numbers and the delta is not 10 or 20%. It's 200%.
Yeah, you got to be smart about it.
Yeah.
So how do you sell your practice?
Yeah.
Where do you start? What are the questions they got to be asking?
Yeah. I mean, the difference now is back then, like when I was buying offices, I had to go, and brokers or somebody would tell me about practices, or Henry Schein reps or BioHorizons reps, Nobel reps would tell me about practices that were for sale and would connect me. And we would go talk to them and meet them and see if they're a good culture fit, blah, blah. But nowadays, the difference is every single dentist, if you have a $1 million plus practice, has so much unsolicited inbound interest that the questions that I would say to be able to ask sometimes don't even get asked, because the DSO is trying to prescribe for you to be like, just go with us. Here's why we're so great. And they want you to just see myopically one thing. They don't want you to see anybody else. So I think that my answer to your question is there's probably like a lot of good questions that I could think of. But one of them, like, it kind of really starts with finding a good group of advisors or people, like you have an accountant and a financial planner, and maybe you have a practice transitions like a broker or somebody that helps you, an attorney. But if a DSO is approaching you and saying like, Amir, I want to buy your office, and they knock on your door or they call you or they have a lead gen team that's kind of soliciting these things, and they're telling you that like, hey, I know you're great. I'm going to pay you $1.10 of revenue for your practice. And you're like, wow, I bought it for 40 cents and this is great. If somebody walked up to your house and knocked on your house and you open the door and they're like, I'm going to give you this bag of money for your house, you learn the same thing that I learned from immigrant parents of, it's worth more.
You got to shop it around.
Yeah, you got to shop it around, and they don't want you to do that. And I think that's unfair. And I like.
Did you have anyone who get like stuck and enamored of the first deal and didn't want?
I mean, a friend of mine in Chicago has 2 locations, specialty implant focused practice, does 3.6 million of revenue, and he called me. He does 4 million of revenue, sorry. And he called me and he's like, he calls me young man. He's like, hi, young man. And he's like, I am going to do this deal with somebody and blah, blah, blah. And he didn't say, I still don't know their name, but it's like, they're going to give me, my practice is 900,000 of EBITDA, multi-specialty, multi-doctor practice, been around for 30 years, the kind of asset that somebody would want. And he's like, I'm like, how much are they offering you? And he's like, 3.6 million. And I'm like, oh no, don't sign it. He's like, I already signed it. So 4 times.
4 times EBITDA.
Yeah.
I see.
And in a high EBITDA. And so I was like, well, don't sign it. He's like, I already did sign it. And we're kind of, doing diligence. And I told him, I said, I know you know my family. Like I'm like, just cancel the deal. And he's like, I said yes to this. And I'm like unapologetically myself. And I'm just like, just don't do it. So we get off the phone. He calls me the next day and he's like, hey, young man. He's like, do you still feel the same way? And I'm like, yeah, I don't, and I'm not making $1. I don't want.
Just advising you.
Yeah. And I'm like, no, don't do it. And then I think he called the next day or something, and he did cancel a transaction. And so he was
Why did you make that assessment?
I know the market a little bit, and I don't know that it's worth 7 million, or I don't know if it's worth 6 million. I know it's worth more than 3.6. And I know from knowing him for more than 10 years, I know how much he's put into the practice in terms of like heart and soul. And so if there's a imaginary delta between what a DSO is going to pay you because they want a good deal and the heart and soul that you put into it, and like the good, it comes down if 80, 90% of a practice is goodwill, like we were talking about at the beginning, it's like if they're not getting enough for their goodwill, I think it's unfair. And so if I can help make things more fair or find a partner that really matches them well, I feel better about it,
Very true. An advisor of mine years ago said, EBITDA is science, multiple is art. You need to make sure you got dial in the science, but what multiple you get is all this art of presentation, great advice, feeling really confident about your business.
That's right.
So how do you, let me ask you this, what are the multiples today in this market?
Like for a single office, and I don't, I'm kind of, it changes. I'd say if you have 500,000 to $1 million of EBITDA, like you'd probably get north of a 6.
Even in this market?
I think so. And I think deals are just, you have to be more turnkey. Like a 6 maybe isn't going to go to a guy who has paper charts and film x-rays because you need to
invest again.
Yeah, you're going to have to invest again, and you're going to have to go through a lot of post-acquisition integration. And so practices that are more integrated, more tech-focused, they've been growing 10, 15% year over year. Those folks are going to get higher multiples because a private equity fund or a DSO thinks of it more like akin to they're going to put gasoline on this, and they're going to put in some better rates, some maybe better centralized marketing and revenue cycle, and this practice is going to grow 20%, 25%. But when you have a practice that maybe is more of a lifestyle business that somebody wanted to make $250,000 a year, and they're taking $20,000 a month, and so the practice is doing $850,000, and it's just flat, and it's in the basement with 2 windows and 4 operatories. That lifestyle business isn't going to get a 6, no matter how good the practice is. I had a friend of mine, or I think a friend of mine that contacted me that was talking about this, and it was like, I'm like, your practice is worth more if you can move it to a bigger facility. And he's like, well, that's a lot of work. And I'm like, yeah, but if you don't do that work and you let somebody else do it, they're going to discount your valuation for it.
Very simple.
Yeah.
So if you want to summarize a couple of factors that are important, you talked about tech stack growth, talked about integration turnkey, but let's just give a very step-by-step.
Yeah.
What is number one?
I divide up offices into like kind of front of house or like admin side and back of house clinical, and then I make an overarching assumption that you're doing good dentistry, you're diagnosing, you're doing high quality treatment, you're using high quality materials. Like I kind of take that as table stakes. If you're using, Ivoclar versus some gray label composite.
Chinese.
Like I make the assumption that you use Ivoclar. I think that the front of the house, that first point of entry for the patient, like you're able to book appointments in real time online. It's not a appointment request system or call the front desk. I think that's big. I think that text messaging, like if you're in office and you're calling patients and you're not texting them, but you have automatic reminders, but they're not two-way textable, everybody texts, obviously. Those things, that front of the office admin and kind of tech savviness, when you think about like as the healthcare experience and the consumer experience become one experience, you have to be able to meet the patient where they are. So I think that admin tech stack function has to be digital, has to have some automation, has to be similar to your experience when you want to order things, at Amazon or Walmart.
Yeah.
DoorDash, right. It knows what you ordered last time and what frequency, and it puts it up
saved,
there. Credit card is saved. So all of those things, credit card on file, that's important. Their benefits could be already in the system because you're using automatic benefits and verification. So that's a part of it. Now you go to kind of back of the house in clinical care. I mean, you're diagnosing, you're using technology to do more, diagnose what the patient wants and needs, but also do more same-day dentistry. Like the days of a patient wearing a temp for 2 or 3 weeks and it falling off 2 times, 3 times. I mean, I could think of how many times I've had to go in on a Sunday to re-glue somebody's veneer on a canine or something, and you're like, oh, this is terrible. But for them, it's terrible,
right? Right.
And so the more you can do same day convenience, like really, as you think about millennial, Gen X, Y, Z,
they want it fast. They want it now.
That's right. And I think that plays a role. So where you could do same day dentistry, if a patient comes in, for a simple example of like a patient comes in for a toothache and they need a crown and build up, and you diagnose it, but you're not willing to do it the same day,
you lose it.
Yeah, you
lower your chance of conversion.
Right. They're going to go somewhere else. Exactly. I mean, why? But hygiene appointments where you're diagnosing perio or you're doing a comprehensive evaluation and a patient doesn't get a cleaning, they've commoditized cleanings in their mind so much because it comes with their insurance that if you're not giving them a cleaning and doing something for them, but you're like, look, I'm the doctor, I'm up here, I have so much expertise that I'm sharing with you, but I'm not going to do your cleaning today. You'll come back because that's how it is. That's not going to work. So I think that frictionless experience, tech-enabled, more same-day dentistry, those things just...
Table stake at this point, right?
I agree 100%.
What about growth? Top line, also same-store sales.
Yeah.
How do DSOs look at those numbers to give you an evaluation?
Yeah. I mean, top-line revenue, they look at physical plant. Like they look at how many operatories do you have. If you have 4 operatories and you don't have room to expand, they think about like, if we're going to add specialty, how are we going to do this? Are we going to have 2 shifts? Are we going to have different days? So you want to have 6+ operatories, I'd say. Same store sales, like if a DSO is getting measured on how much organic growth that they can create or like value creation, and they're getting measured more on a multiple of value creation and how good they are at integration, value creation, not just how good they are at buying stuff.
Right.
So I think that like when you look at same store sales growth, like if you're a single office, it's got to be north of 8%. I mean, I see offices 10 to 15% same store sales growth because DSOs, if they're a good, strong DSO, their same store sales growth is 6 to 8% on their own. In a mature group of offices.
How do they improve it? That's marketing, right?
I think some of it is marketing. I think some of it is like adding more value to a hygiene appointment. I think it's maybe introducing clear aligners. I think it's doing more same-day dentistry. So some of it is like, I think of it as a funnel. Like some of it is getting more new patients, but getting more new patients that need procedures or want to get their social 6 realigned because they didn't, wear their retainer. I think that some of it is that, some of it is reappointment and kind of going to the lifetime value of the patient. But some of it is also diagnosing and then being able to offer options to pay over time, credit card on file, we'll charge you every month, whatever financing options, but being able to close cases. And so some of those things all contribute to.
Does it matter how
store.
they do marketing, social media versus card and mail?
Yeah. Yeah. You shouldn't. I mean, social media is just necessary. Like, social media presence, like you look at some of these like legends in dentistry that just they're recording their day from their morning workout, like it's like aspirational, like of your morning workout to the cold plunge to the office. And they do such a good job. What happens in the office? I mean, their social media is such a big part of it, and so I think that social media is a big part of it. Reviews, referrals are obviously the best marketing that there is. So I think, social media is something. I wish I was better at social media.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. It's not easy too.
No.
People think it's easy, but it's a lot of work. What about, I think we talked about that some doctors show, look at how much undone procedure I have.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What's your take on that?
Yeah.
That's a good thing or bad thing?
Yeah. There was like an office or somebody that was like talking about like their valuation, and they're like, we had $2 million of revenue, but here's $1.5 million of treatment plan dentistry that we haven't done. So it was like the concept of like meat on the bone. This is for somebody else to do. And he was telling me, and I'm like, I think that DSOs or somebody is just going to think you're not competent or you're not a good dentist.
You're not
like
a closer.
Right. You're not a closer. And I think he's like, well, I thought, I'm like, you're not leaving these procedures on purpose. You're not like just saying like, oh, I'm treatment planning your crown, but next year when I go through an acquisition, the next dentist will do it. You're just not closing, or you're treatment planning things, or you're watching things. I have a lot of those funny conversations.
It's pretty amazing how I don't blame him. Again, these things are not natural. Look at you. MBA, built a 35 practice office, sell that, go to Walmart. Now you have so much wisdom. Right. It's not a second nature to a lot of people.
No, if I was me 10 years ago,
you didn't know any of these.
I would ask dumber questions than this.
Yeah. I think probably the last topic, and we close the podcast. Let's say we got our multiples.
Yeah.
Good. Over 6 is probably a very good number if you can get in this market.
Yeah.
In the post-interest rate hike, it was around 10. I've seen practices 10, 11.
Yeah.
So those numbers are not around anymore.
No.
But let's say above 6.
Yeah.
We talked about partner is not a partner is not a partner. Money is not a money is not a money. What are the other intangibles of a deal that someone should pay attention to?
I mean, I think you're looking at like, if you're going to work with a partner, if they're asking for or partner with a DSO, if they're asking for your financials, like you have a right to see how that DSO is doing. Like, because if you're going to roll 20, 30, 40% of your sale proceeds into equity into this company, don't you want to see how they're doing? They might have a great website, a great business development team, a great C-suite team, but do you know if they are well capitalized? How many more, what's their EBITDA revenue? Like, what's their same store sales growth? Like, you can ask questions back and forth because it's really going to be a marriage. And so you're negotiating an agreement, but it shouldn't feel like it's one-sided. Mm-hmm. And there's DSOs out there that have bought a lot of offices, but now have abandoned sale processes and failed transactions. And so if you're a part of that, it's unfortunate, but maybe one way to hedge against it is to know more and more questions and ask questions about who you're partnering with. So I think that's important.
What about that ratio of cash up front versus equity and earnout? I think there are three. Is it three parts in dental deal?
It depends. It depends on the DSO. Sometimes it could be like cash up front, escrow, earnout, equity.
Right.
There's some DSOs that are like, we want to make it simple. It's just cash and equity.
Sure.
Which is nice. Earnout sometimes is like phrased as a retention bonus or retention payment. So for every you're owed 20%, and if you stay for 5 years, it's 4% over 5 years. They do it in a lot of different ways. They're trying to minimize the amount of upfront cash.
But for dentists, I think it's better.
Yeah.
Because if I'm a dentist, they give me a $20 million deal, $2 million up front.
Yeah.
80% hoping they're going to do a transaction. And
Yeah.
what's your EBITDA if you get a 20 million? Let's say at 6 is 3 million.
Yeah.
You stick around 5 years, that 3 million times 5, 15
right.
plus the 3 at the beginning, you make that money anyway.
Right.
Why would you not take that money up front? So can you educate a little bit on how do they do the math?
If you have, if you have a $3 million EBITDA business, you're doing amazing.
Right.
So we we use like a $1 million or $500,000 EBITDA, which is like probably
more common.
More common. If you're getting a 6x on that, let's say you're getting $3 million, and as the enterprise value, some people will typically the transaction will be like you want to roll. They'll give you 2.1 million up front, and you roll 900,000 as equity into the company. And so then after that, you're paid as an associate. So if you're producing $1.5 million, let's say, you're going to get paid roughly 32% something. So you're going to make $450,000 or $475,000 as the annual income at W-2 kind of ordinary income tax. But I know some dentists, like as they get older, they want more cash up front. So maybe they want to roll 10%, but DSOs won't let you roll 10%. Maybe it's 20. And I know some younger dentists that want to bet on themselves and their practice is growing 20, 25%. The DSO is newly formed and they're like, I'm going to roll 40%. So you kind of see that, but it's probably around from 20 to 40. The DSO wants majority control, so maybe they let you go to 49. I've seen that once, but they're not going to let you
roll more than that.
Yeah.
The part I have issues with, I think, is often goes unnoticed to a lot of unsavvy dentists who are selling their practices. For you to get the second chunk of the deal, that DSO has to sell. That's not a guaranteed deal. You really, the part that is guaranteed is the upfront and the salary.
Yep.
That's why I tell a lot of friends asking me, I tell them, do the math. You'll make that money regardless because you have to commit 3-4 years.
Yep.
And you're working for someone else rather than working for yourself.
That's right.
The second part is, as you said, if they don't ask the right questions of how many, what was your multiples last time you got traded?
Yeah.
If you got traded 15 times and this market is 6, and do they have a chance to flip and sell the DSO again so you make your money?
Yeah.
That's the part that a lot of people don't know.
Yeah.
They're stuck with the cash they got and the salary.
That's right. And I think more and more, as you see more and more abandoned sale processes, failed sale processes, you see more and more DSOs that are lender owned, that kind of foot faulted on their debt covenants and this. The more and more failed DSOs you have, the smarter that the consumer becomes, and the consumer is the dentist.
Yep.
And I think they ask more and more questions. I hear that a lot of like, oh, I don't want to be like these guys.
Exactly.
But they didn't even know what was going to happen until it happened. And that's why you can kind of get smarter on the front end and ask some of these questions, because like you said, like it's, partner is not partner is not partner, and money is not money is not money. And so I think that if you don't get the second bite of the apple, or third bite for some, if you don't get those things, there's a good chance that you could have made that money and more and still had 100% clinical autonomy.
What I tell my friends is the first chunk has to be a good deal for you.
Mm-hmm.
The rest should be gravy.
Yeah.
The first part got to be steak. The rest is gravy, because the rest might not happen ever.
Right.
For a long, long time.
Right. But that
doesn't happen in DSO.
Right. But what you're saying is right. But what a DSO says is not that. They say that the second bite is probably going to be just as valuable, if not more valuable, than the money you took up front. Because they're betting, if they, to their LPs and their investors, if they don't get the second bite of the apple, they're going to get a goose egg, and they're going to lose that equity, and that goes against their returns and their future fundraising and this. So they're selling dentists on the fact that the second chunk is going to be as big, if not bigger. And so what your point is like kind of bet on the now and, take as much as you can up front, which is the opposite of what a DSO says. So maybe the answer is somewhere in the middle, but that's the challenge, right? Is like, if you have a $500,000 EBITDA practice and you roll the $900,000, and that $900,000 is and you took $2.1 million up front, and they say that $900,000 is going to be worth 3 to 5 times cash on cash, so it's going to be 2.7 to 4.5 million. Like, that is worth more than the chunk you got up front, and so that's why they call that rolled over equity in this. They call it affectionately, it's like the golden handcuffs.
Right.
So you're handcuffed.
I think there are more, out of 10 deals, there are 9 of them who the dentist gets screwed, rather than the second part, the rollover, get more than that. I've seen a lot of it in the past couple of years.
I agree.
And that's why it's just, my response is, do the math. If you make that money anyway, don't do the deal, because you're your own boss. You run your own schedule. Now you got to be running on EBITDA numbers, all this stuff.
Yeah. No, and I agree. And I think what you're saying is based on the times of today and seeing the failures, you want to be more cautious, right?
True.
You can't just sell your practice, and sometimes people are like, well, if it doesn't work, I'm just going to go and open another office. No, you're not.
Not easy.
I mean, that's not easy. You're not going to do that. You want to, but it's not that easy. You have a non-compete that could be 25, 150 miles. It could be all of the offices that they own and they're looking at. Where are you going to go? You're going to be here in California, and then you're going to tell your family, hey, my non-compete is big. We're going to move to Florida.
Yeah, that's tough.
That doesn't go over well.
Dr. Ro, thank you for coming to the podcast.
Oh, this is awesome.
You should come back more, and we geek out a lot on
I
this
will.
topic.
I will.
Yeah,
I will. This is fun.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks, man.
Have a safe
Appreciate
flight
it.
back.
Thank you.